Mute myself.
That's all right. So good evening and officially welcome to what I think will be a very exciting night tonight. So the secrets of great astrophotography. So I'm Robin Campbell and tonight's going to be hosted by my husband, Andy Campbell. So I started the Australian Photographic Prize last year with my business partner, Karen. And it was basically a call out because the photography community here in Australia was really missing having social connections and our award systems. So Karen and I started the Australian Photographic Prize last year. And then this year we saw a really great opportunity to reach out to the astrophotography community. So something that we really pride ourselves with in regards to the Australian Photographic Prize is we're not just about being a competition, we're about education and allowing a platform for photographers to improve their work.
Recording in progress.
And because of that, basically, we have this format where everyone can get feedback on their photography. And the process is amazing because year after year, you see people improve constantly. But my understanding in the astrophotography world is that opportunity isn't so much there to be able to hear from people you admire and see your images judged in a dynamic forum. So this is why we're running the Australian Photographic Prize. And a part of that is why we're bringing you tonight because, we want to build the education base in terms of what it takes to take really great astrophotography. And I've been with my husband, Andy, for the entire journey from the very first telescope right through until now. And I tell you what, he's put a lot of hard work and effort into learning secrets of the trade. And I think I feel very honored that he's going to share a lot of that with you tonight. So if you're good to go, Andy, I'll let you take it away.
Okie dokie. I shall share the screen. All righty.
And you're welcome to ask questions in the chat as well along the way.
Let's see if I've got the right screen up this time. Got the one screen or the two screen there?
Okay, just one.
Excellent. Happy days. All righty, team. Yes, thank you, Robin. So I'm Andy Campbell. Good evening, everybody in Australia, and hello to you all in the world. This is being recorded and broadcast everywhere, so we are honoured and delighted that you're all here. And we thought we'd share some information with you. And some of the panelists here tonight are some of our judges from the APP. So we have strongman Mike Sidonio, who's in the room tonight. We have Ari Rex, who's in the room tonight. We have Tim Moon, who's in the room tonight. And these experts will be able to dissect a few images for us and give us a little bit of information and some tips about how to make our images better. Just a little bit about me. Been in this astrophotography game for 10 years now, going from absolute raw beginner to, I guess, winning a few awards. I've had a small advantage in that I've been a professional photographer all my life. But as you all know, astrophotography is a totally different ballpark. So with that in mind, I thought I'd give a quick presentation on some of the things that judges will look for in astrophotography when you're, competing with images. So first of all, we have this thing called the dynamic image recipe, which has three main criteria there. So it's there for you to see. And I guess you've all got a fairly good idea about, what the first two are. But what I wanted to touch on in particular was the third one. And that's the bit that I guess a lot of people maybe haven't put as much thought into with their images. So the first two are largely capture and processing. Everything you see there needs to be right. And we all know how hard it is to get those things right. And those of us who have any hair left, if we haven't torn it out over several cold nights, dealing with issues and connectivity and all sorts of other things, but isn't it satisfying when it works? And when it does work, it gets, a real high and a buzz, particularly when you have all of these amazing things working for you. So let's assume we've all got some pretty good idea about capture and processing. What's this creativity thing I hear you say? This is a little bit of, at the end of the day, we're looking at photos. Whether they're astrophotos of extraordinary nebulas, whether they're Milky Way shots with beautiful foregrounds, at the end of the day, it's a photograph. Most photographs need to have impact. And I think you'd agree that these photographs here are a selection of impactful images. And I guess if you've got impact, that means you're going to get the judge's attention. And getting their attention for a start is enough to sort of, in this case, literally get them up off their seats and have a close look at your photo. If possible, maybe you can get some emotion into it, as Mark G has in these images. Mark G is a well-known photographer from New Zealand who won the International Astronomy Photographer of the Year, I think 2014. And you can see yourself in these images. There's a strong, powerful emotional connection with the family members on the left looking up at the Milky Way, or indeed all these amazing people looking at the moonrise, which he's somehow managed to photograph with a 600mm lens with a lot of careful planning and an extraordinary dedication.
Really very good.
Yep. Does your image have a story? This is an image of mine on the left that I was inspired to shoot this particular nebula by Van Gogh's painting, the famous Sunflowers painting. So I mapped the colors and worked the composition with that in mind. The judges liked it, I guess, but it caught the attention of the APOD guys, which is the astronomy photo of the day. And perhaps if there's a story to your image, it may get the judges a little bit excited as well. There's a thing here called pareidolia, and let me know if I'm going too fast for you guys. But pareidolia is where our minds want to make sense out of what we're seeing. And if you're seeing a nebula, your mind is starting to go a little bit like, okay, I can see a bunny rabbit, I can see a dolphin. It's a little bit like when you were a little kid and you laid back on the grass, looked up at the clouds, and you thought, oh, you know, there's Donald Duck over there. Well, in this case, certainly in deep space photography, we can be reminded of certain things. So, for example, an eyeball, a horse head, or a wolf, which is pretty cool. It also gives the judges something to talk about. And I think that's also very important because the judges do sometimes like to have, you know, a little bit of excitement about what it is they're seeing. Sorry, Robin, just to interrupt. Someone is trying to enter the room and I'm not sure how to let them in. I'll move on. Composition. Often in astrophotography, we labour hard to make our optics perfect, to get the tilt out of our systems, to get the spacing exactly right, so that when we go to photograph an object, I guess, you know, if it's in the middle, it's going to take advantage of all of those options. But then, does it present the best possible composition if it's just in the middle? So the example here is, you know, a very, very early Trifid Nebula image and one a little bit later with a little bit of thought composition. The one on the left was one I shot in 2013. I think it was the first deep space object I'd actually captured. I was so excited that I guess, you know, it was just a thrill to actually get it. Here's another one, that a trap that some people fall into. And when I say trap, maybe it's just something to give a little bit of extra thought to. And that's simply because, look, if you can fit two things in your frame, should you? And why should I present that? Well, sometimes your eye will look at the image on the left, and then it'll go to the nebula on the right, and then it'll dart backwards and forwards until it eventually rests on the nothingness, the space in between. And maybe that's not the strongest, bestest place for your eye to rest. So I'm just going to float that up there as an idea, because maybe those two objects, you know, could have been shot separately and be a stronger image. Okay. If you have Photoshop or Bridge or any other program that allows you to bring up a cropping window with the rule of thirds as an overlay, what that then gives us is a chance to frame our targets. And with the modern software with astrophotography, we can frame our targets in advance with virtual desktops, and we can plan exactly where that object is going to reside within our field of view, which is very exciting to be able to do that. And should you happen to obey this thing called the rule of thirds, there's a good chance your image compositionally will be pleasing and therefore perhaps get the judge's attention. Let's talk about color palette briefly. So color palette can be used with the color wheel here. You can see the photo on the left here, which was taken by a colleague of ours, Neil Creek, and he's taken advantage in this case of the light pollution over the lake, which is this golden glow of, I think, Ballarat in the background, but contrasted against the rich deep blue of the Milky Way, it creates a bit of depth. Indeed, the opposite is on the right, where you see the complementary colours working together. And it's very simplistic as well, this one on the right. Different techniques are available to us all, of course. And in this case, here is the same object presented 4 different ways using 4 different techniques, as you can see there. And each one is presenting a different view of this object. So just because we have all these filters, do we need to use them all? Do we want to use them all? Can we find creative ways to use them? You know, if we're not using them, why are we deliberately leaving that out? For example, if we're using a hydrogen alpha filter, you know, we might see a lot more detail in the background in this case. And so these are choices we have with techniques. With your field of view, do we want to go close up, as we have on the left of this object? For you northerners, this is called the Running Chicken Nebula. And you can see on the right, there's a wider view of the whole thing. But when you see the view on the left, there's a lot more sort of quirky bits. There's things called Bok globules in there, star-forming regions. There's misty mountains. There's a little coal miner down the bottom. There's all kinds of stuff to look at. So maybe sometimes, you know, those of you who have longer telescopes with longer focal lengths, maybe zoom in on a commonly seen object and show us a bit of it that that hasn't been seen in isolation before. At risk of being controversial, it's a popular thing to consider taking the stars out of an image. And does it add anything to the image or does it subtract from the image? Some of the judges here tonight have got very strong views on this, and that's totally and absolutely fine. It's just another technique that you may or may not choose to use. But remember that astrophotography, I think Mike phrased it as astro being stars. Did I get that right, Mike? It's sometimes, I guess, a question as to why you would leave the stars out of an image.
Oh, yes, that means star. Astro means star. Yeah.
So yes, I did get an APOD for the image on the right without the stars, but would you run it in a competition up against, I don't know, it's a question. I don't want to get too much into that now. What about if we see something new? What if you present the judges with something that no one has photographed before? There's still plenty of stuff out there. You know, everybody has probably got their own version of M42, whichever side of the planet you live on. But if you come up against something brand new that no one's seen before, it's likely to get the judge's attention. And therefore, it'll probably help get those awards in there a bit closer. And you can look on Galaxy Map and find all kinds of things in hydrogen alpha and various other surveys that are taken by research telescopes around the world. And maybe you'll find a little bit that maybe you think, wow, that looks pretty cool. And just maybe someone hasn't photographed it before, or they haven't photographed it the way that you could. And so these are things to consider overall when you're making your images. So just to recap that portion of the presentation, these are some bullet points that perhaps should be considered when framing your images, when choosing what you're going to shoot, and when deciding what it is you're going to enter into the competitions. So how is that, guys? Does that give you a little bit of a background there? Okay. So what we'd like to do now is show you some images that have had a little bit of work done to them in a before and after sense. So Ari, you with us? Ari, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, I did.
I'd like to introduce Ari Rex. Ari is a Whitefield-based photographer in Canberra, Australia, who runs fantastic night workshops. And Ari, take us through what are we looking at here on this image?
Hi, everyone. So this is one of the images during one of my workshops about 5 years ago at the Auroral Homestead. Can anyone hear me? Yeah, all good? Yeah?
Yes, all good.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, the person's name is Joanna of this image, and was the first time that she came to for her Milky Way, to take a picture of the Milky Way. And I give a brief kind of guide of how to edit an image, and she did pretty well with the first time capture. I was quite pleased with it, but the reason I put it here just to because then we went together and we worked a little bit more on the image to bring it to kind of correct it a bit and brighten it a bit, and being careful a bit with those sliders, because it's quite easy to go a bit over sometimes, and a bit of straightening, and the image in my opinion it went a bit more gave a bit more of it's a bit more pleasing to look at. So it didn't take much to straighten it. And the other image here is actually another Jerry Libin, is from USA. He took this image, and he was really he did a story about connected with this image, and he wanted to kind of process it and save it. And sometimes we go a bit too over it, and instead of fixing an image, we actually make it worse. And that's the perfect example with this image. And then we went and fixed it, and this is actually the same image, and we kind of brought out and balanced a bit the whole thing. So he was quite pleased with. He thought he lost the image, but a good point with this image is to realize that many of our images, we actually capture them. There is a lot on the image that is already there. It's just that you probably need a bit of care and a bit of knowing how to. That obviously takes a bit of time, but taking out from this image, a little tip is that better look at the images sometimes and move the sliders slightly bit, shadows up, highlights down, and kind of as a first rule to check out what we have there. We throw away a lot of images, and this is a perfect example of that image. Some cameras actually have, and I believe this is one of them, that have the ISO invariant. So it doesn't matter how much. I think you showed it at ISO 200 or something, but the details are there. So with better checking a bit those old files that we have probably.
Right. Thanks, Ari. So we'll move on to the next image, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to get bogged down too much on every.
Yeah.
So Tim Moon, you're in the room, I believe. I think you're knowing a little bit of this image or the story behind it. You there, Tim?
Yep, just unmuting myself.
Thanks, Tim. So Tim, this image is by a student, is it?
Yes, someone from our camera club. So we had an outing up to Barrenjoey Lighthouse in Sydney, up at the end of Palm Beach, and there's an iconic lighthouse on the end of that. And depending where you are and the time of year, you can get the the Milky Way laying over in the western sky there horizontally. So great time of day.
So Tim, how could this image be improved if we wanted to see it get into the awards, do you think?
Well, one of the things that that they have actually done with it to get it to this point, which I think is quite good, is just the control of the highlights and the shadows. So often in the Milky Way, that little spot there kind of in the middle on the top there gets burnt out. You probably saw that in a couple of Ari's images where you just got to selectively edit them a little bit more carefully and control the highlights and bring the detail back in, just so you're not providing yourself a hotspot, which tends to distract. So bringing out the detail, that's always a challenge at night, and shooting the number of exposures that you need to do to get all that detail, capturing the lighthouse when the light's not flashing at you, all those sorts of challenges. But I think this one, I think what it does well is just controls the highlights and the shadows very well. But
Tim,
bringing out.
Sorry, Tim. What do you think of the composition on this one with the lighthouse right in the middle?
That's right. That's a challenge, isn't it? And that's pretty much what you've been addressing. I think there's another one a little bit later that challenges the central location. But I think the natural thing to do is to try to show the whole of the Milky Way and then put whatever you're going to hang the Milky Way off as a bit of a focus bang in the middle. Especially with the arches, often you'll find someone locate something bang in the middle as a focus to the arch.
I think it still works. Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, so with the composition, there are lots of different ways of looking at it. And I think in this particular image, it works really well because that's the center of the Milky Way. So it actually makes sense to sort of have the other main focus of the picture in the central. So it gives that connection between something on Earth that's the center and the actual center of the Milky Way. And it is symmetrical, so it does work. So things don't necessarily have to be offset or in the rule of a third. So in this case, I think that's working quite well.
It's a good way to anchor it, just to use that item to, that's our reference point, looking to the Milky Way, and you're taking a central point to a central point, as you say.
Yeah, can I add something?
Very good.
Great about this image, about placing it in the middle, is that when you have a wide angle lens and it's the best place and you lift it, as soon as you lift it up, we have the problem of diverging lines. And this is a perfect example where you can go a little bit higher because you're placing the subject in the middle and it just works fantastic. So, and the trees are on silhouette, so you don't see really the direction of diverging lines. So it works really good.
If you guys can mute yourselves in the background, please. Okay, so Tim, take it away.
Yeah, well, this is probably the reference, as to, you do the same thing in anchor it. But I think what this is, the composition here is a little bit more dynamic in that it's kind of like shooting the hole, isn't it? So you set up the arch and then the roadway sort of charging in from the right and then shooting straight through the center of the arch. So I think the things to watch here are just the stitching. The stitching's leaving a few artifacts around the place. Up in the top left there, you've got probably about an eighth just on the left-hand side of the Milky Way. There, up in the dark area, there's a little bit of stuff going on, bit of artifacting. Also, in the center of the arch, underneath the arch, there's a little bit of interesting things that Photoshop or whatever the stitching software has done to it. And also just the wiggles in the road. So stretching it around, you can see there's a little bit of warping in the road. So all those little technicalities are a little bit of a distraction, but love the composition. I think that's working well, just stretching the arch from one side to the other and laying out the landscape before us.
Question, guys, about the color. Are we looking at Earthshine or an aurora? What are we looking at here?
It looks like
Sorry,
Mike?
sky glow.
Sky glow.
Sky glow. Yeah, that's the sun doing that. So I guess it's a little bit like aurora, but different. It could be aurora. Does anyone else know?
Yeah, no, I've had that color without aurora, so it's it just depends on where you're pointing, time of day, all that sort of stuff.
Before you move that slide, Andrew, I want to say something. This is a really good image to show something. A lot of skyscape photography makes it look like the picture of the Milky Way has been pasted behind the landscape. In reality, the horizon extinction means that the Milky Way is going to be dimmer when it's near the horizon. And this particular image does it perfectly. So that's a very believable view. It's not an exact replica of the view at the time, but it's believable. When you have the Milky Way on the left there, just as bright as it is further up, it's not realistic. So one of the good things I like about this particular picture, it looks like I'm standing there because that's real. That's exactly what the Milky Way does everywhere on Earth. So that's just a point I wanted to make.
Yeah, and I think back
You'd say
to
that's a good example then of this sort of genre.
Yeah, showing that atmospheric extinction, which is what it should be. If it doesn't show any atmospheric extinction, I kind of think a little bit like, okay, this is, a bit of license here to make it unrealistic a little bit. But yeah, so it's just a thing to think about.
Thanks so much, Mike. That's fantastic.
No worries.
Righty. Gentlemen, we've got two images here. I'm not so much putting up them to compare them against each other. I literally just decided that we should see two at once. But given that they are both Milky Way images, what are your thoughts on these ones?
I'll start. Kind of segueing from what I was saying before, the one on the right there, it's a very realistic, very believable. It's how it should look, but it's gone very deep, so that's spectacular. But it's not unrealistically deep. It's not, oh, here's a photograph, I'm going to paste it in, doesn't match a tree. It actually matches the tree, and the composition is brilliant. It's a really good example of a portrait shot of the Milky Way, because quite often the Milky Way is shot in landscape for an obvious reason. So I really like the one on the right there for that reason.
Thanks, Mike. Tim, what are you thinking about the one on the left?
Yeah, just referring to the previous one as well, I think what we're trying to get through with that last idea about being a little bit creative in how you put the images together is you can have a very technical, perfect image, but if it doesn't have the passion or show you something about the experience, it's not elevated. All right, so you're trying to elevate the image by, here you are standing here in awe, watching this arch of the Milky Way above you, and the heavens opening up, and that sense of depth and space. And I think that's what we're trying to capture in these sorts of landscapes. It's finding a vessel to express that that passion about what you're actually experiencing and trying to capture. So to me, the one on the right, beautiful picture, but the subject for me is the tree. It's not the space, all right? It's not the sense of outer space. So it's great capture of the tree in its circumstance on a starry night, but I get more passion out of the one on the left because I've got an aurora, I've got the Milky Way going off, I've got everything that I could ever put in a picture for a person in the southern hemisphere. And you've also got that leading line of the water leading out on the beach. So, and even the reflection of the stars in that water. I get more of a response from the one on the left than the one on the right, just because it's concentrating more on the subject, which I think is the astrophotography.
Thanks, Tim.
So once again, it's very believable.
Yeah.
Ari, what are your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, I was like looking, and I agree with both Michael and Tim about both the images. The one on the right is the main subject is definitely the tree, and it's I say always in my workshops that a Milky Way image, like the wide field Milky Way image, a big part of the image is the foreground, finding an interesting subject and how you frame it, and the Milky Way sometimes complemented and sometimes become a secondary background. And the photographer here has done a pretty good job with the tree. Its simplicity, I like the simplicity of this image, and also the treatment is quite soft. And many people I've seen that they go a bit too much on Milky Way sometimes, and in this image is treated right, in my opinion. The image on the left it's a bit more complicated and very well done. Like definitely the leading line of the reflection in the front, it takes you just right there at what the whole happening of the aurora. And the emu at the back is like, I've never seen an image where the emu is, it looks small, but because of the framing is done so smart, I'll give the photographer quite a bit of points there. To take the image probably just in another level would be probably if there's another frame or couple of frames for the top part of the image where the stars, they go a bit, and I know it's very hard to get images like this, but if you can constrain a bit the stars on top, this image, it's probably, you know, on the top there, I reckon. So pretty good. My compliments to both the photographers.
Thanks, Ari. That's valuable feedback. Robin, there's someone else wanting to hop into the Zoom as well, which I can't access from here. Just hopping out of into deep space land just for a moment. These are a couple of images of mine that I thought would be valuable as a teaching exercise as part of the journey, I guess, that most of us go on when we start out with this crazy hobby. And as you saw earlier, that image on the left of the Triffid, I was so proud of that at the time because it was the very first one that I ever actually managed to capture. And now, of course, I look at it and go, and then the one on the right is a little bit of an improvement on that. And I guess what we could look at here, we've got some great experienced judges here with Mike in particular with the deep space. So Mike, what sort of things would you suggest might have happened here in 6 years that have helped this?
Well, first of all, you look like you've learned how to stretch the image a little bit. You're probably bringing out some of the background a bit more, but also I'd suggest you probably take a much longer exposure. You probably got the color balance a little bit better. A few years later, a lot more stars. I know you're not overly fan of stars, but they look good in this photo, don't they? Yeah,
Right.
the compositions are a big change, and that composition really is very good. And the way the cluster, there's a cluster just out of the top left for M21, and so you've got those couple of stars leading off the top left, so it makes you look at the nebula, and then it takes you off and makes you go, I wonder what's out there. Oh, I think that's good. I really do. But the colours are really good. You've got the dusty colours there between the red emission nebula and the blue reflection nebulosity on the right. Whereas perhaps before, you're missing a bit of that. It's a little bit too green. Although there is a little bit of green in that area, but not that much. So yeah, so still the one on the left, pretty good effort.
The
one on the right, the beauty.
The one on the right was shot from Light Pollution City here in Melbourne. So that was pretty interesting.
Pretty good job.
Can I compliment you on the improvement there, Andy? I think
Thanks,
Yeah.
man.
you get more of a sense of deep space with the one on the right. You get the sense of the depth of the object. You get a sense of the cloud formations and all the rest of it. So you're sharing much more of an experience of space, I think, in the second image.
So with this classic composition from, I guess everybody's got a bucket list image, and the horse head was certainly one of mine at the time. But again, here is an image. The one on the right is not mine. The one on the left is. But look at the difference that you get when you get a sense of scale of space of the one on the right with all of the Orion's belt showing there to really give you, I guess, a sense of some of the titanic forces that are happening out there in space. And I guess, I'll throw this to Mike. What do you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, look, I think the one on the left there, what it's showing is how important colour is, because it's good to throw in all sorts of wonderful colours in narrowband imaging, and it's got to kind of make sense. It has to kind of work, and I'm not sure that an orange colour for the nebula overly works in this case. It's kind of a bit of an odd contrast with the blue. So I think the main thing that could be improved a little bit on that one would be just to get that colour spread just a little bit better. and it's also a little bit smooth, so perhaps a little bit less noise reduction would help too. The composition is actually not too bad. The top star there perhaps is making you keep look at it and you think, what's that doing there? Maybe I should have cropped it out, but then you'd lose that little flame on the top left. So there's a few things that could be improved to make that work a little bit better, in my opinion. Yes.
Thanks, Mike. And what you've suggested there is a great tip for everybody on having a really bright star close to the edge of the frame. It's a bit fraught with danger because whenever you look at the brightest part of an image, and if it happens to be a star, and if it's not really where you want your eye to be going, then maybe that star could have been cropped out or rotate the frame a little bit so that it wasn't going to be a distracting
So I think
element.
rotation probably was the answer there, just a little bit.
So this is
sorry. Yep, you're right.
This is interesting because I shot the one on the left in 2015 and the one on the right several years later. And again, I guess we all learn a lot. And sorry, Mike, I know you had an image of this, but it was very similar to this one. So I thought I'd just leave this as it was.
Yeah, I realised after I sent that, oh, whoops. Yeah, you already had that one. That was my mistake. Sorry.
But I think the important thing here, Mike, if you could just share with everybody, is what's going on in the background of this object? What's the, I guess, the blue and the red?
It's clearly a lot of
What are we looking
emission.
at here?
It's clearly a lot of it. Yeah, oxygen atoms are being excited, and also hydrogen atoms mixed together, and there's a little bit of perhaps just a small amount of personal color balancing to make it look pleasing. So it contrasts a bit with that Wolf-Rayet star bubble that's being blown in space there. But clearly the composition is superior on the right one. It looks very appealing. And the bright star, which is really good. I see a lot of images people take of deep sky objects, deep space, where they subdue the stars in the sense that they lose their shininess, they lose their sparkle, and that can take a little bit away from the image. And I think the one on the right really shows that beautifully, that it's hasn't done that. One on the left, perhaps a little bit too much background extraction, a little bit too monochrome. Monochrome could probably benefit from a little bit more color dynamic, and that would make it look even better. I mean, it's still a very good image, the one on the left. And it's very hard to take a non-intriguing image of this object because it is so incredibly intriguing. It's like, what is that? It's very three-dimensional, and it's very rare to see a full photograph of it from that perspective.
Thank you. All right, Mike, over to you. You're the resident galaxy expert on the panel.
Don't worry, other people will get a say too. Don't worry. Yes. Well, now we're looking at some galaxies, and I guess the main thing looking here is interest. So that galaxy on the right is a spiral galaxy. It's pretty much face on, and it has a lot of H2 regions visible, which can give it a bit of color. The one on the left also has that, but the color balance could probably be improved a little. We've got a bit of a yellow in the center and immediately transitioning to red. So there's probably some work could be done on improving that transition so that we do actually get the blue arms in the spiral galaxy and the yellow in the center. But still not bad. It's in the center of the frame, which, from a visual perspective, be aesthetically pleasing. Having it a bit offset might help, but I don't think that's a huge stumbling block with images of galaxies, because at the end of the day, the galaxy is the subject and it doesn't always ruin it if it's in the center. The one on the right was not put in the center because just to the left of the galaxy, in the left-hand side of the frame, there is actually some faint dust, and there's a beautiful edge on the spiral galaxy. And the composition was on purpose. So there was actually something to look at there. Whereas the one on the left, there is actually not much immediately around that galaxy at that framing. So there's probably not much the photographer could have done. Maybe brought those bright stars up the top down and put the galaxy a little bit further down to the left. So yeah, overall, both nice images. Mainly the color with the one on the left would be improved a little bit.
Tim, I'm
colors
curious
in the stars too.
I'm curious, Tim, about your thoughts on the composition of the one on the right.
Well, I want to talk about the one on the left.
Well, whichever one you want to talk about.
So just a question for Mike about things being plumb. All right. So with the little, starburst that you've got, it's not quite at 90 degrees. Does that annoy you? It annoys the architect in me. And if you're going to get it almost.
You're talking about the spikes on the stars.
Yeah.
You're talking about the
So
diffraction
if
spikes,
you've
so
got
the
them
one in-
almost vertical and horizontal, wouldn't you go to that extra little bit and plumb them all up?
well, that's just how you've rotated the chip in
Yeah.
relation to the spider on your telescope.
Yeah. But
So if
you
you're
got
going
the
to
choice.
compose the image,
Yeah.
then
Hmm.
yeah, well, I think it's personal. Some people really like the star spikes going up and down and left and right. Others
Mhm.
like them at an angle, which is the one on the right.
That's right. That's a good comparison.
To me,
where
that
you've got the
doesn't make or break an image. Yeah.
Okay.
To me, that doesn't make or break an image. Not for me, anyway.
Very good.
right. So
I
for
like-
the one on the right,
I like-
I don't mind the disposition in that one because you've got the bright star sort of occupying the top left-hand quadrant there, and you know your eye is being drawn to the different areas of the images by where the items have been located. So having
That's right.
having that galaxy a little bit off to the right works well with the composition for the rest of it. So looking at the overall
Yeah,
composition,
I believe the imager did that on purpose. I believe.
so if you were to put the galaxy central, you'd miss out on those other relationships that are available in the image.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, and as I said, the one on the left, perhaps
Hmm.
if you brought those a bit more interesting.
Alrighty. So here's everybody's favorite nebula. There must be 42,000 astrophotographers around the world who have shot M42. And I guess the challenge with M42 is what can you bring to M42 that perhaps someone else hasn't, or is it just a case of, is it a technical exercise that you want to make your M42 the best one for yourself that you can possibly create? So here we have two classic compositions, I guess, of M42, but there's some fairly strong differences in between that perhaps Mike could share with us about what we're seeing.
Orion Nebula is imaged regularly for a good reason. It's an absolutely beautiful object. It's actually very difficult to get the dynamic range working. You see the image on the left, one of the things, and it's a pitfall, the thing that occurs in a lot of images of M42, it's actually very difficult to get it so that bright central area looks natural and blends in naturally. It often ends up with a dark sort of hole around it that's not supposed to really be there. And you can see it in that one there, you've got a bright sort of trapezium area, that's the 4 bright stars, right, the yellow bit. And then there's this dark area that's kind of like a kidney shape, upside down kidney shape above it. And so there's where it could be improved a little bit. And the way you would do that was blending. You'd make a number of different variations or versions of the image, and then you blend them and slowly blend that in so that you can still see the detail, but it still looks bright. And you see the one on the right's done that. The trapezium area is still bright as it should be, but there's no unnatural darkening, dark hole. So that's one thing with M42 particularly that's, I think, important. And really, the one on the left could just probably give a little bit more pop. There's a bit slightly stronger color, I guess, and I think it's a pretty good effort, though. I do.
And Mike,
Someone
would you
else might like to jump in here and make some contributions too.
just going to suggest, would you think with the one on the left, a lot more exposure would help to bring up some of that dust?
I think so. That would make it a better image. Absolutely, yeah. But the first thing I see with that M42 is that unnatural hole with the green in it. So that draws my eye, and there's a little bit of an error there. So that could be reprocessed and made a lot better. But it's actually not that easy. It happens a lot.
I think the virtue of the one on the right is just how the object looks more three-dimensional, and I think you're kind of talking about that in the process of capture and processing is not only have you got to get the things right, get rid of those little green spots and do a bit more exposure to get the cloud, but in all of that, but also the processing working together to create that sense of three-dimension in the object, which I think is much more present in the right-hand image.
Yeah.
Good.
All
Alrighty. One of the another very, very popular target in both northern and southern hemispheres is the classic M45, the Pleiades, and it's a bit of a favorite of mine. It's not my image, but I remember as a little boy, I looked out the window and my mum told me the the story of the Seven Sisters and how, you know, they were the daughters of, you know, Atlas, who held the world in his shoulders, and Zeus turned them into doves and then stars and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, it captured my imagination, as it does for everybody. And it's an extraordinary object. But I'm just wondering, Mike, what do you think? How could someone perhaps get a better rendition of M45 than the one we're presented with here? Sorry, you're on mute, Mike. There we go.
Sorry. Yes, there we go. The depth is one of the things that a lot of people shoot for pretty heavily when they're looking to take a good photograph of the Pleiades. So making it a little bit deeper, a little bit longer exposure, so you could get a lot more of that background dust, that would probably bring it out a little bit more. So you've got more interest, more things to see around the nebula, the star cluster. There's more nebula around it. But I think it is sort of central in terms of its composition, but it still kind of works. Color looks reasonably good. You know, it's not a bad shot.
So if one were to consider shooting this for an award competition, you'd be thinking basically just more data, or what do you
Probably
think?
more data, and I think it needs a bit more contrast. Yeah, needs a bit more contrast, a bit more detail brought out in the striations in that nebulosity. And there is a lot in there. It's a huge amount. It's like a mad spider's web of stringy nebulosity all the way through in between all those stars. So I think there could be a little bit more dynamic work done on the contrast.
All righty. Thanks, Mike, very much for that.
No worries.
Guys, just want to share something with you, if I may. Put in a little plug for something I've been working on over the last year and a half, and this is 40 pages of Photoshop tips and techniques, specifically for astrophotographers. Launched it yesterday, and they tell me it's maybe worth your while to have a look at. So I'm just going to leave that there, and I'll pop the link in the chat if you want to have a look at that. But what I'd like to do now, if it's all right with you, is hand back to Robin, and she's going to give us a little bit of a overview of the Australian Photographic Prize and perhaps how you could consider entering. Over to you, Robin, please.
Absolutely, no worries at all. So I have the honour of talking about the Australian Photographic Prize from the astrophotography perspective. But just before I do that, did anyone have any burning questions they would like to ask? Was there an image there that they saw, or perhaps there was a comment made and you'd like additional sort of clarification or anything like that? So we've got a question here from Katie saying, would it be appropriate for an astro landscape photographer or just deep space? I think that's in regards to your book, Andrew. Is it just deep space Photoshop technique, or is it for DSLR as well?
There's a little bit in there for everybody, but of course it is, I guess, largely based on deep space.
Yeah, fantastic. We had a couple of other comments along the way as well that were quite interesting. Someone was asking why there was a streak in the reflection in the river, but there wasn't star trails in the actual sky itself. So that was quite interesting, and I think everyone on the chat has answered that quite nicely. Did any of our judges have a comment on that? The fact that, you know, what we see in the sky may be different to what's in the water?
Well, it might have been, the sky might have been chucked. So
This image, Robin?
Yeah, that was the one.
so
Hello.
You want to
Could be
unmute,
that-
Sam?
yeah.
It was an interesting observation, but with our landscape category, astro landscape, you actually have the capacity to be able to composite images. So you can actually shoot sky and then shoot the ground and put them together as long as they're shot from the same location. That's the only proviso there. So if you're using a telescope or a lens and you want a different foreground, you can definitely composite them together. So even if
I don't think that star was trailed, by the way.
Sorry?
Just to clarify, that star in the reflection wasn't trailed due to Earth's rotation. That was just an elongation due to the reflection.
There you are. There is the answer. Brilliant.
Excellent.
There's a question here from Doug asking if judges can comment on the role of saturation and comment on how to balance realism with too much saturation. Ooh, that's a good one. I would like to answer that. I think you're going to get two different perspectives here, Doug. I think, your landscape purists are going to want lots of color, and your more technical astro guys are going to want more detail. So, Mike, which way are you going to go?
Oh, look, I think it really depends. When something's too saturated, when it isn't, it's fairly personal. And sometimes a person, depending on the mood you're in, what you've been looking at, you may look at an image and think it's way too saturated, or vice versa. If you've been looking at your own image and it's very saturated, you start to not see it anymore. So a person who sees it for the first time goes, "Oh my goodness, that's saturated." But you haven't seen it because you've been staring at it for hours and days processing it. So you lose the sense of how saturated it is. But how is too saturated? Well, I think you would want to avoid getting that kind of all one color with no variation whatsoever in large swaths of the nebulosity in the case of deep space. I think that that photograph that's on the screen there now, bottom second from the right, is a good idea, where they've controlled the saturation to a point where you get away with it, because even though that's quite a strong magenta, it's just not quite oversaturated. So it nails it, looks good, it works.
Brilliant. That is excellent feedback. And definitely the idea of having a shot, working on it, walking away and coming back a few days later is a really good one. And I know people that are generally very successful in awards will come back to it over and over and over again. I know a Western Australian photographer, and when he does his prints, he literally will hang them up and leave them for a week and then come back 1 week later and then have another look and have another think. So great advice there. What we'll do is when we hit the 1 hour mark, we'll probably finish up our recording, but anyone that's keen to hang around and have a chat and discuss a few more images, that is completely fine as well. If we just go back one slide, Andrew, we have a big thank you to Sidereal and Williams Optics, because they are actually sponsoring the Australian Photographic Prize in terms of astro categories, and they're giving away 2 absolutely brilliant telescopes. As part of the Australian Photographic Prize judging, we also have a trade show and workshop, and they're giving 2 presentations on the Friday and Saturday. It's only $10 to come along, so I encourage you to do that. There'll be more details than that in a moment. And these are our fabulous judges. So you've met some of them tonight. They're all very, very highly qualified due to experience and also due to awards. And they will be judging your images. Some will be judging them online, and then that is your panel for judging them live as well. So one of the things Andy mentioned earlier was the idea of putting a bit of pareidolia in your images so that people then chat about them. And that really leans towards the live judging. So if your images are strong enough to get in that top 25, you really want images that are going to pull the judge's attention, because you've got a panel of 5 there. The print, the image scores, 82. There might be a judge there that goes, nah, I reckon it's a 92. It's a finalist. And they're going to debate it really, really hard and hopefully get you up in those finalist points that you want. This is our Astro Landscape category. So there are specific rules in there. You'll notice their composite images are acceptable, so that's fine. And the timeline is after the 1st of June, 2018. So you can actually look back a little bit into your databank of images and pull something out from a few years ago. That is absolutely fine. We've kept it at 5 years because still not as much opportunity to travel as previously. So some people may wish to look back into their banks of files from a few years ago. Steve, you can enter as many images as you like into the astro categories. Our print categories are restricted to 8 only. However, our astro and digital categories are not restricted. Astro Deep Space, so again, we've got some regulations there in terms of data and processing, the use of AI and so forth. And when we get to our top images, we'll be running them through AI detection software as well, just to make sure that they're all hunky-dory, not breaking any rules. But entries open on the 1st of June and close on the 3rd of July. So yeah, it's time to get shooting. So when you enter, you have a chance to receive feedback, and that's an additional $5 per image, and that gives you written feedback on your digital entries. If you get through to finalists, you get that feedback regardless. And we're encouraging people to not necessarily going into the competition thinking, I'm going to win this, but it's more about leveling up your skills. So finding out, where you sit next to others in the industry and in your field. And then year by year, just improving that. So come along and check out the live judging. It's one of those experiences that you really can't replace. Once you've seen it, people tend to get very addicted to it. Tim, you've experienced this. What's the before and after on live judging?
Fantastic, because you get in the mind of the judge, and you learn the nuances. And the whole exercise is to try to be dispassionate about your own image and see it through someone else's eyes. And if you sit there quietly unoffended and not completely destroyed by the process, then you'll learn quite a lot.
Absolutely. Yep. Look, we teach our judges kick, kiss, kick. So we're hoping they're keeping to that formula. But, every now and again, you will get a kick that will hurt a little bit more. But it's about learning from that. For finalists, semi-finalists, and commended, we are giving out digital badges as well. So if you run a gallery or if you want to just raise your imagery to that next level, having a badge like this does make a difference. So the scoring range means that if you're between 90 and 100, you're a finalist, between 80 and 89, semi-finalist, and between 75 and 79, you are commended. So you get to use those on your images, which is pretty cool. The rules are out now. I will pop the Australian Photographic Prize address in the chat in a moment. And that's where you can go to find out more information. And this is just a little bit of information on the event as well. So lots of great speakers, photography in general, but also, Diego's coming along and he's going to be chatting about astrophotography. So that is on Friday between 1 and 1:30 at Photography Studies College, Melbourne. We actually have, I've heard, we're up to 35 people that are just randomly flying in just to attend the judging and the workshop. Plus, we've got our judges. So there'll be actually quite a few people that are taking advantage of $10 for lots of workshops and are flying in from all over Australia to make the most of it. So I encourage you to do the same. You do need to jump online. And you do need to get a ticket though. So if you don't have a ticket, you can't actually get in the door because it's an education facility. We need to know who is coming, but you get a goodie bag, so it's worth it. And something I'm personally incredibly excited about, after Diego speaks from 1 to 1:30, we have our judging from 2:30 to 5:30, and then we have our Celebration Astro presentation. So Mike, who you've heard tonight, will be presenting for us a 1-hour special presentation all about his journey and his image creation. Mike, how's the talk going?
Oh yeah, I've got the first page and it says the journey, and I've turned it over and I've got the second page and put a little 2 on the bottom of it, turned it over, and I'm on the blank third page at this stage.
Awesome.
That was a joke. No, I'm not. I've got a lot. I've got plenty for you. It's all good.
That's right. You got the images. If you're stuck for words, just go to ChatGPT. Anything is possible. You'll be fine.
That's it.
It's a brilliant event.
Yes,
It goes.
being half Italian, I've got no problems chatting.
Awesome. To get into the evening event, it's $75, but I have an 8-meter grazing platter already ordered, plus wine and nibbles. It's just going to be a fantastic event. Lots of fun. And you get to hang out and chat to these guys as well as possibly be the winner or see the winner. And I think, Andy, you're working on trophies at the moment, aren't you?
Yep. Nice, pretty ones. Absolutely.
I think they might even have stars on them.
Yep.
Oh,
Everyone likes a trophy. I'll pop these links in the chat so that everyone can see what they are for the overall prize, the rules, the judging, the celebration, and the ebook as well.
Beautiful. I think that brings our official bit of the evening to a close. I'd like to thank our judges for taking the time to come along this evening. And I know, everyone's sort of busy with life, so it's not always easy to pull aside an evening. So we really appreciate that you have been able to do that for us. So officially I'm going to close off, but anyone that wishes, I'm going to hang around and, maybe grab a glass of wine and chill out. If anyone else wants to do the same, is more than welcome. Have a good evening.